Welcome to Resilience and Resolve with Lance Drury.
Hello and welcome to Resilience and Resolve with attorney Lance Drury, the podcast where we break down the complexities of the tax world and help you navigate through the numbers and paperwork. I am your host, Kevin Rosenquist, and today's episode is all about innocent spouse relief, a lifeline for unfair tax burdens. Lance, welcome back.
Glad to be back, Kevin.
So this is a new one for me. What is innocent spouse relief?
That's an area of the law where one of the spouses can file for tax relief, where they file jointly with their spouse. But it has to be more than I didn't know what the liability was when I signed the return jointly with my husband or wife. So there's got to be something going on. Let me just give you an example. And to be honest with you, I've never done one of these. All my other attorneys have done it, but I've never done one. But we had a case a few years ago where the liability was over $100,000, and her husband ran a restaurant and a bowling alley, and she had filed for divorce from him. And all of the allegations were documented in their pleadings in the court case. And because of that, she basically had nothing to do with the business, had no knowledge of the tax liability, did not know that he was incurring tax liability. He kept her out of the dark in a number of areas of their marital life. And so we filed that, and she was granted 100% spousal relief on the basis of that. But what really strengthened that case was all of the court documents that they filed that pled exactly what we were alleging in the innocent spouse petition.
Okay, so that makes sense. So is it or does it only really come around for divorced couples, or is it can it be for couples that are still married too?
Well, you could still do it for somebody that's still married, but it's more prevalent in a divorce situation because, if they could get innocent spouse relief, then it would help in terms of the IRS could not come after 100% of the jointly held assets. The IRS can only come after 50% if the one spouse was granted innocent spouse relief. So it's something that we look at. It's not as common as a lot of other areas, but we do file. We probably have, perhaps 5% of our clients are eligible for innocent spouse relief. And it's not really anything you want to do on your own. And there's so many factors involved. The questionnaire that's submitted to the IRS, which we submit to the client to determine if they're a good candidate, is like 8 pages long.
Whoa.
And so, there's a lot of different areas. Every case is unique. So it's really on a case-by-case basis. And it's normally the lack of knowledge concerning that situation, that the other spouse deceived them, didn't tell them about this. This went on for years. So that's the type of situation. But there's just so many variables with it. It's hard, other than the case I gave you, to give you a typical case where it's going to be granted relief.
Are there other situations where someone might qualify for innocent spouse relief other than the example you gave?
Oh, sure. There's a number of situations, and it's all based on those different variables. And like I said, the questionnaire that has to be submitted to the IRS is like 8 pages long. And so actually anything that's strengthened by court proceedings, anything that's strengthened by showing the lack of knowledge of the spouse, or that this was typical of their marital relationship, those are the different areas which are most prevalent in the granting of innocent spouse relief.
Is it difficult to prove eligibility?
It can be. It can be. Like I said earlier, just the fact that you didn't know that when you signed the return, you didn't say anything, because you have an obligation to review the return before you sign it to see what's going on. So in that particular area, now, if they file electronically, then they can make that argument because it's not required under those circumstances. So it's easier in those circumstances to have innocent spouse relief.
Okay. And how exactly does it protect taxpayers from unfair tax liability?
Well, if you can show that you should receive innocent spouse relief, then the liability goes away and none of your assets are subject to seizure. You're no longer subject to any levies like you were before. So then people who have let's say an inequitable situation within their marriage, they're going to be free and clear of any tax liability, and therefore the consequences of levies, liens, garnishments, that type of thing. And they can't seize any of their other assets either.
Okay. And if someone believes that they may qualify for innocent spouse relief, what steps should they take? I mean, you said it's difficult to do on your own, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's 8 pages long. We just had a woman. She had submitted it on her own years and years ago. And when she filed it, she tried to apply it to future years, and you can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
So we got all that cleaned up, did another one for the year, which is now in the past, and was able to get that granted for her.
How long does it take to process these claims?
Oh, it can take everything at the IRS is so screwed up. Everything takes forever.
We talked about that last episode, especially now, right?
Yeah, I've never seen the IRS this bad, and you're talking 6 months to a year or longer. We've been dealing with this one woman forever, and so it's because they don't get back with you. They don't have enough resources. But that's true of most things. You file an amended return, it can take 1 or 2 years, if not longer, to process. So it's everything that's going on with the IRS, and not just that. We get agreements set up with the IRS and their direct deposits, either for a partial pay or for a streamlined installment agreement. And it's so frustrating to my attorneys because when the day comes that those monies are to be debited from their accounts, guess what? The IRS didn't do it. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they got to call back 3 or 4 times before the IRS actually takes the money out of the account. Wow. And so I get it. It's more work for us. And then sometimes we have to get the taxpayer advocate involved in those instances, particularly for installment agreements where they're not issuing a currently non-collectible letter because they didn't send it up for managerial approval or whatever. But when those things are taking too much time, we get the taxpayer advocate involved. But the problem with the taxpayer advocate is they're only going to call you once every 45 days. And guess what? If you're on the telephone, you call them back, it's still going to be 45 days before they call you again. So wow. It's a typical bureaucracy. And, it's just getting worse. Like I said before, I've never seen the IRS this bad. They're hiring people who don't know what they're talking about because they're poorly trained. They don't get the proper training. And, you wouldn't know that if you called them up. Fortunately, sure. Because we spend 50 to 100 hours a year or more just in keeping up with the workings of the IRS, we do know. And so what we have to do is then we tell them, well, we got somebody waiting for us. So we get off the phone with them, call them back until we get somebody who knows what they're talking about. So it's really widespread in the Internal Revenue Service right now that they're just having problems with keeping up with the caseload and with servicing the clients the way they should. And so here, everybody wants to cut their budget. Everybody wants to cut their budget. And, that's good in terms of certain things because then, sometimes you can ride out the clock on collections because they don't have the time to get to all those people. But if you got a problem with the IRS and want to get resolved, then it's not good that they're cutting all these services to people.
I wonder if all this chaos is going to finally make you retire.
No.
Well, I was just curious. So back to the
innocent... You already knew the answer to that.
I did. I just wanted to hear you say it. So back to the innocent spouse relief. What, as far as the process goes, is it just you fill out that long questionnaire, you submit it, and that's it? And then it's either approved or denied, or is there more to the process than that?
Well, there can be more. They might come back and want you to submit additional information in a certain area. But the normal process is you don't talk to anybody over the telephone about it. You fill out the form, you send it in, it gets sent to somebody, and then they normally send out a finding. Either we're going to accept this in whole or in part, or we're going to reject it. And then you do have the right to appeal. But like I said, it's the nuts and bolts of it. It's not like you can call up on the phone, get a revenue officer, and you know that they're going to get back with you. So it's a much more time-consuming process, not in terms of the amount of work to get the innocent spouse relief submitted to the IRS. But in terms of them getting back from you, it can just take forever.
And if somebody is denied and then they appeal and they're still denied, are there other IRS programs that could help them if they really feel like they're kind of in a bind with this and that they're getting kind of unfairly treated by this tax situation?
Well, you go back, then the liability's on the books, and what you have to do then is you have to show that you don't have the ability to pay the money back.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that helps a lot, but still they're stuck on the line for at least part of it most of the time if they can't get innocent spouse release. Yeah.
I mean, it seems almost like I know that there's always nuances and like there's a lot of variables, like you said, but it seems like either you shouldn't be burdened with the taxes or you should. It feels like but is there a lot of gray area between whether somebody should qualify or not?
Well, part of it probably depends on who's reviewing your case, but that's true of a lot of things with the IRS. There are some revenue officers who are decent, but then there's others that they don't care. And so, they'll just do what they can. Even sometimes, and I had this years ago, and you have to get a hold of their manager, they'll just bypass you as the power of attorney and talk directly to the client, which you're not supposed to do if you have an attorney. That's the purpose of having an attorney,
right?
That they're not supposed to talk directly to the client. But I've seen the IRS employees do that, and I've had to call them out on it.
So what kind of questions or what, some examples of questions are on this questionnaire? Like, what are they looking for to determine whether or not someone should qualify?
I think probably the biggest one is the extent of their knowledge in terms of the tax liability. But like I said at the outset, just because if you signed a return, you have an obligation to review the return. So it's got to be more than I just didn't know that the liability was so great because you didn't review the return, and you should have reviewed the return.
So it kind of becomes a thing of like, well, my husband or wife just said, hey, I got taxes done, just sign this, and you'd sign it. They say, well, they just sign it and don't ever look at it. And that's sort of their claim. Like, I had nothing to do with this part.
Right. So that's without more, that's probably not going to fly.
Without more. Okay.
Yeah. You got to have, and again, you can prove it through the marital relationship, other areas where you were kept in the dark about what was going on, to show that, the finances of the company, a lot of these companies, the spouse has nothing to do with the company.
Sure.
So if you get that, and you're a sole proprietor, so everything flows through your 1040, and you can show that this stemmed from mostly the business, and you had no knowledge of the workings of the business. You were not a corporate officer. You were not a member of the LLC. You never went into the office. You didn't sign paychecks. You had everything solely separate. Then I think you can make a good case for innocent spouse in that instance.
But if you had anything, if the spouse had anything to do with the business, even if it's like light, even if it's just helping out with some things, nothing to do with finances or nothing to do with books, it would be harder to prove.
I would say a little harder. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
But it depends. It's you're getting to that gray area because how much knowledge did they have?
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, the more knowledge you have of the workings of the business, or the more actual involvement with the business, then it's going to be much harder to prove.
Does the other spouse ever fight back? Because then all of a sudden the tax liability is 100% on them, right?
Of course. In fact, the IRS has to notify the other spouse that this innocent spouse petition has been filed, and then they have the right to contest that. So yes, there's got to be notification to the party that they're claiming was in control of the situation, and so they have a right to be heard in court on that too. Because you're exactly right. Then all the liabilities on them, and so that's why they have to be given notice and a day in court to be heard.
What does that look like? Do they just protest, or they say that it's not true, and it becomes like a he said, she said kind of thing?
Well, it can be. I mean, they have a right to examine it and to make the rebuttal and to submit documentation as to the extent of the other spouse's knowledge. And so, yeah, it's not basically a he said, she said. That's probably not going to get either one of them very far, but it's the amount of documentation they have to prove their particular position in this matter. But that's true of most items. You got to have the documentation. If you don't have the documentation, you're not going to win an innocent spouse. You're not going to win at an audit, because if you don't have documentation for your business expenses or your business deductions, you're not going to win. You have to have the documentation. It's the same thing when you call them up and try to get a deal from Uncle Sam. There's such a thing called the national standards. So for different categories of expenses, the IRS says, this is what we're going to give you. For example, housing and utilities. Every county in the United States has a different number for housing and utilities. Well, guess what? 90% of my clients exceed that because they're so low. And then you get into a metropolitan county, they're not really fair because, one part of that county, housing could be a lot lower than at the other part of the county. So they just take an average. And so, again, for those categories, you have to have documentation. You can get your actual expenses in the automated collection system if you can show them the documentation. So, like most things in life, it's how good your records are for everything. And that's where people get in that run their own businesses. They don't keep good records. In fact, in the state of Missouri, there's a record keeping requirement. And when people get audited, that's the first thing they do to them, that here, you're going to do this, this, and this from now on. And to be frank, a lot of these people that are in small businesses and run small businesses, they're very good at what they do, but they're poor at record keeping. And the last thing they want to do when they get home at 7, 8 o'clock at night is to go through paperwork.
Yeah.
And so we had a woman once on an audit, and they had all this income in her business account, and they said it came from the business. Well, it didn't, but she didn't have the documentation to prove. What she was doing was she'd go to the bank, get some money out of her personal banking account, and put it into the business to prop it up. But she had no documentation to show that because she was getting cash. So, and they're going to put the burden on you. If you deposit cash into a business, you got to prove, you got to have a paper trail there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in this day and age with all the digital stuff, it should be easy, but to some degree, it could be a little more difficult because you don't print anything anymore. At least I don't print anything. I just keep it all digitally. So, I suppose you got to just be diligent about your documentation in a digital way.
Well, I got to tell you, I'm old school.
You're old school. Yeah.
Well, I still have my day timer, even though we do have a digital system for all of that. And, we still keep the physical files.
Yeah.
In addition to our backup. But a lot more is digital than it used to be.
Sure.
But I still want to keep all that because here's the thing. The paperwork we get on a daily basis, I bet we spend 3-4 hours just going through the mail with the IRS.
Wow.
And we would have to hire somebody full time probably to do that on a daily. So there's the cost then of an additional individual.
Yep.
So we're sort of a hybrid there.
Well, the takeaway for anyone listening: documentation. No matter if digital, physical, documentation.
But that's true for anything.
Yeah, good advice for sure. All right, well, thanks for tuning in to Resilience and Resolve with Lance Drury. To connect with Lance and his team, visit lancedrurylaw.com. And don't forget to like our video and subscribe. We got lots more great tax advice and tips coming your way. Lance, thanks so much for your time. Always great to see you.
Good to see you, Kevin.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.